Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, YouTubers. Okay, once again, I'm going to try to get a video done. I'm believing that we may have a shopping expedition going on, so hopefully I won't get interrupted until I'm done. And that light is just irritating. Okay. Seriously exhausting stuff. All right. I have considered/threatened to read this book out loud. It's a very enjoyable book, a very educational book, a very telling book, a very powerful book, but written by a military type character, and it has an inordinate amount of French in it. Now, having said that, I will say that I've said before, I recommended it to a certain woman, and I said, it's got a lot of French in it. She goes, that's okay, thanks to you I'm fluent in French. Ha ha ha. French meaning F-bombs, primarily. But I have mentioned this. This book was highly recommended to me by a woman. This woman was military, ex-military, former military, whatever you want to call it. Quite the character. I'm not sure if she's still with us, but if she is, hi. Hope you're doing well. Colloidal silver generator still working good, and you're in good health as well as can be expected under the circumstances. Get grounded, use negative ions, activated charcoal, get negative, and be healthy. All right, so said before, the Creator is not bound by space nor by time, so I'm going to put a name out there, Dinky, D-I-N-K-Y, Dinky. Pray for her. I'll leave it at that. Might be posthumously, in which I don't think it'll do any good in my theology, but she might still be alive, so please pray for her. She said the first Appleseed, I met her through Appleseed, Project Appleseed, how to shoot Army qualification training. In other words, how you can stand up and put a bullet through somebody's head at 300 yards, open sights, no scope. Yeah, that kind of shooting. She was a master instructor. She said the very first Appleseed she was at here in Missouri, because my two kids, Ian, my son, was the state coordinator for quite a while, and for a time. And my daughter Susie was a range officer. She was an RO, and he was a whatever, MO or something like that. So they had just did whatever Dinky told them to do, and respected her absolutely. But hey, I get 30 seconds to talk to somebody, and I had about 30 seconds with her. I didn't know how much I'd ever have any more time, and I said, listen, this region, the Ozark Plateau, is going to be the central gathering place for safety for God's people in the end times. I don't know if you're a Christian or not, but I just wanted to put that out there. What do you expect from a military person that knows how to kill people? She said, oh, that is fascinating, because the very first Appleseed I came to here in Missouri, I was 1/3 of the way up the man's driveway, and God spoke to me and told me that I would be moving here. And I said, to this farm? And he says, no, silly, to Missouri. This woman had a connection. When she was 3 years old, she talked to God and said, what are you? And God said, electricity. Consider that the entire universe is electrical and the entire universe is held together by electricity. And Colossians says, in him all things do consist, hold together. Electricity holds the entire universe together. And when you go to smashing them little atoms, they have a funny way of smashing back. You know. To smash the simple atom was all mankind's intent. Now any day the atom may return the compliment. So, anyway, this book was recommended to me by a woman, so stick that in your pipe and smoke it. This is online. This is BAEN. Jim Baen is a publisher. But under this website, hell.pl/SZYMON/Baen, BAEN/clause, blah, 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 last Centurion. Okay, so that was my rating. This is all the bunny trail, I know, and if you don't like it, too bad. I'm tired and all that good stuff, and I wanted to touch on this book anyway, and it's a reason to touch on it. Because if you're less than 10%, or if you're less than 20%, whatever. Suckage in a time of suckage. So, I'm going to read this. Call Me Bandit. Okay, hopefully that's like the last time I'm going to make a literary reference, but you never know. Beware. Beware. There's a bunch of these stories out there now that people are getting back on the net. I figured, what the hell? I've got one too. Sure, we all do. But, what the hell? People started calling it the Hell Times after some pundit was spouting about it on TV. I mean, the Great Depression was taken. They didn't have the plague or the freeze thrown on top. I know it wasn't a plague, and all you nitnoids are going to point out that it was some flu virus, and plague is bacterial infection, and yeah, I know. Thank you. We all know, all right? Sheesh, there are times you wish it had been targeted at nitnoids. Everybody calls it the plague. Okay? Get over yourself. Anyway, people call it the Hell Times. I don't know. Maybe I've got a better personal fix on hell than they do, or maybe I don't. Personally, having been in combat and blown up... Having been in combat and blown up and shot and seen people I care about blown up and shot, and even people I didn't particularly care about blown up and shot, and having visited a volcano once and thought about what it would be like to spend the rest of fracking eternity forever in one. I don't call it the Hell Times. Bad as it was, seems to be an exaggeration. Me, I call it the time of suckage. This is my sucky story about the time of suckage. So there I was in Iran again. This is no shit. It was my 4th trip to the sandbox in my short years as a soldier, and it was a maximally... what do you say? Messed up tour even before the time of suckage. Look, you spend any time as a soldier and you get good change of command and bad change of command, good jobs and bad jobs. You deal. It didn't help that the Prez was a whiny bitch who really wanted us out of there but couldn't figure out how to get reelected and stab us in the back at the same time. The equipment was short, training was crap, the Mujahideen knew all they had to do was hold their ground and we were eventually going to leave. And boy did we. Not that it helped them much. Seriously, I met some Iranians and Iraqis and Afghans that were pretty decent people. And I'm sorry as hell for what happened to the good people, most of them that inhabited those countries. But hell, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so short introduction. Very well written. Quite a bit of raw language, but it's military. Deal with it. I would, on the subject of books like this, and say, I think particularly of Out of the Ashes by William Johnston, long series of men's action books about a post-apocalyptic setting. The main character, I had a list of like 30, very precise, very detailed, very intricate, very impossible parallels between the main character in that story, Ben Raines, General Ben Raines, who was just a colonel in their military, and a man by the name of Bo Gritz, just a colonel, lieutenant colonel in the U.S. military, the highest decorated officer in Vietnam. Okay, I mean, that's eerie, really eerie, and I can remember a lot of them, probably half of them right now off the top of my head. I'm not going to. Ben Raines had a contingent of personnel who served as his bodyguard, and just the whole story is just why am I talking about that? You know, why am I talking about that bunny trail? Because it was a post-apocalyptic situation, and where it relates to what we're going to be facing is living through storylines like that. Lights Out is a classically good example. As reserved as that book was, language-wise, and basically being presented from a moralistic, biblical, whatever, Christian, quote-unquote, and I always say quote-unquote, and that C on Christian, when I say that, is a small c, because Christianity as a whole, Christendom as a whole, is so far removed from Scripture and reality that it's not even funny. Okay, so, but even though Lights Out was a fairly reserved book, you still had some horrific things happen in that book. Okay, so I don't know how many people got sick, but there's things going on in our world right now, and again, I'm not going to go into it right now, but I believe that there are things that are affecting and twisting and bending the minds of a lot of people and killing people. What I'm thinking of in particular, I'm just going to mention it, and I'm not going to go into it, is there's something called the dark web. I am not recommending that anybody get on there, because I think it could kill you. I think it is killing and has killed people. It's evil. There's a lot of evil stuff there. One person that moved from California, who apparently was a nice, wonderful Christian when they left California, only person I know of who personally, I could say, has attested to being on the dark web, seemed to become demon-possessed somewhere between the time they left California and hit Arkansas. I mean, insane / demon-possessed. So, very horrible. And that has led, if that person is still alive, they basically murdered a friend of mine. Okay, for all practical purposes, committed murder. Okay, in my estimation, under the law of Yahweh. So, you know, no, I'm not even going to name any names there. If you've listened to my videos, you know who I'm talking about, and on both sides of the issue. So, pray for both of them. One for redemption, and the other that the person's still alive, which I'm losing hope that he is. So, all right. Point is, I would not advise against reading some of this stuff because it could wake you up. I mean, we all have this veneer of, I'm so holy, and I'm so righteous, and I'm so godly, and I'm so this, and I'm so that. Well, I'm here to tell you, I've heard some extremely bad things from people who I considered to be the holiest people I thought I knew, you know. So that's all. That veneer, more often than not, is just bullshit. It might be shiny bullshit, and it might be polished bullshit, and it might be dehydrated bullshit. You know, like horse manure is very good for making plaster and working in your walls, and it might be horse shit. It might be really shiny, reflective horse shit, but it's still horse shit. So, all right. So, anyway, I would not recommend against reading this book. So, I'm going to read this last part of it. This is the very end of the book. He had long story. Sum it up. I will sum it up. No. I will start at the beginning. No, it's too long. I will sum up. Okay. Inigo Montoya. All right. So anyway, this one contingent of military is left in Iraq, guarding a massive ammunition and armament dump, missiles, tanks, everything. Shells, everything you can imagine. And they were the last one out there. Everyone else had been pulled back to America because there was a worldwide pandemic. So they were finally given permission to blow the place up and come home. Well, they couldn't get home because there was no transportation. So they started driving across Europe, Greece, Turkey, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Eventually they made it back. They got back here, they started rolling across the country and cleaning things up. The last Centurions. Okay, so you get the picture. The news, obviously, CNN, we now know is fake news. Well, in this story, at whatever time it was in the future, they had a dippy president like we had in the last president, and it was a bad situation, and the news was all fake news. Well, we all now know because of Twitter and Trump that the news is fake news, and they engineer it, they manufacture it as they go. So anyway, this guy started doing real news. Let me go back to I didn't fix this up. I'm not sure even what page I'm on, but dhimmi, if that's the word, whatever, females were by law not to be veiled. They had to wear the hijab, the headscarf, which is a sign of ownership, by the way. But they could not wear veils. At the weekly auto da fe, females ranging as young as 10 were pulled out of the dhimmi households and used for the pleasure of the caliph and his generals. Sometimes they were used publicly while the parents and husbands were forced to watch. If you don't know what used means, that's, the F word. Rape is a method of control. It is an exercise in naked power. It was used as such to ensure that things in the caliphate were peaceful and ordered. Then there were the slaves. The slaves were dhimmi that could not pay their taxes. They did the majority of the labor on building the mosque as well as combat emplacements, chained in long lines. The shackles on their legs were muffler clamps. Mostly they were as ragged and emaciated as death camp survivors. Given all that, you'd think that anyone would want to become a Muslim, right? Only persons of color were permitted to submit to Allah. Like I said, he'd have made Martin Luther King a racist. The news media by the day of the final assault was trying to change its tune. Why? People had stopped watching anything but the new Centurion. He had his own television program going on. They knew they would get their news as facts, not spin, not a picture of something and a whining bitch talking about how soldiers who were incredibly well regarded by them had been killing innocent women and children. But they would get the point of what was really happening, actually happening. There's no point in watching a 24-hour news cycle, CNN, if all the news is wrong. People were turning off their TVs until Centurions came on. By day 4, the news media was getting the hint. It was taking a clue bat, but they knew that whatever they showed that night, we were going to deconstruct it and destroy them with it. Change, we actually had a hard time. That was the title of one of their shows. But CNN could be counted on to toe the party line, and they had a shot of dead women and children lying in a roadway. They'd been chained up to stop our advance. They couldn't run and they couldn't hide. They were shot in the back by soldiers of the caliphate when farmer freaks breached the perimeter. And the soldiers died seconds later, courtesy of 2 fast-acting TCs and the World War I era Ma-Deuce. If you don't know what a Ma-Deuce is, butterfly fed twin barrel 50 caliber machine gun. My buddy that we lived with said, "Give me a Ma-Deuce and I'll take out anything in the world." So, Ma-Deuce, Mother Deuce, 2 50s. Count them 2. All right. Thereby saving hundreds of lives. CNN showed the bodies from the hips up. They didn't show the chains. They didn't show the sobbing men, women, and children being released from them by soldiers of the United States Army. They didn't show the women screaming at us, "What took you so long?" Actually, they showed the angry mob. They just did a voiceover that cut out what they were actually angry about. We deconstructed that one too. We deconstructed piece after piece that showed the Army and the Carson administration in the worst possible light. We talked about what the Quran really said, how it could be interpreted, and how the Caliph had perverted even that perverse document. Don't like my take? Go read Surahs 8 and 9. Skip 1. It's superseded by Muhammad's own directives in Surah 6. We found moderate Islamics, real ones that were immigrants and had been good Islamics in their whole lives, and got interviews about their anger at what had been done. The one imam from Iraq who was crying and apologizing over and over again was particularly good, I thought. By the next day, the news media was effectively broken. They were interviewing survivors, and even CBS and CNN reporters were getting a bit testy at what had been allowed to happen. That this travesty could be permitted in America at even the worst of times says something about the previous administration, and the news media has to share a portion of the blame. CBS Evening News, president of CBS News, Day 5, quote unquote. By then, units were going into all the contested cities and finding similar horror stories, none of as bad as the caliphate that had been held up as enlightened, but very fucking bad in their own way. Not my language, I just read the book. Then came trust. That was all me. I'd actually built most of it from footage going back to the very beginning of the plague. It was in parts very dry. It's not anyone's favorite, and perhaps I should have quit on a high note, but I wanted my swan song to be my song. I talked about trust. I talked about societal trust. That's one of the major points, major lessons in this book that you can learn, societal trust. America is the only nation on earth where it's ever happened. When it worked and when it didn't. I talked about assimilation, the melting pot concept versus multiculturalism, the salad concept. I talked about studies of societal trust. I pulled in shots from the gangs of New York, talking about how multicultural it had once been when Italians and Irish and American, quote-unquote, Americans couldn't talk to each other and didn't trust each other and therefore killed each other in such droves that the Army had, way back then, had to do a Detroit, meaning from his story, they went into Detroit to clean it up. This was before Detroit became the Detroit of today, but back then it had been a city, and it's a long story. It had become a mess. Probably as bad or worse than it is today. Anyway, they had to do a Detroit on New York City itself. And now one group had great food and the other had great beer, and it was otherwise hard to tell them apart. Irish, German, Oh. I talked about how Swedes and Norwegians, two cultures as white bread as you can find, had once battled even here in the U.S. over differences brought to our shores. Okay. One guy at a festival gathering, feast gathering, said 1,000 Swedes running through the weeds chased by one Norwegian. He said, "You've heard that before, haven't you?" Because I gave him a blank look, and I'm like, "No, I ain't never heard that before." That goes back to your, raging hatred of Norwegians or Swedes. Okay, and I'm going to finish with this. If we sunder ourselves internally, this is where you got to get this message through your head. A lot of you have really thick heads. Get this message into your head. If we sunder ourselves internally, if we accept the false divisions, then we bring with those false divisions all their ills, all their blood of centuries. Where then can we find trust? If we cannot see the difference between the evil that stands here before us with blood-soaked hands and what we are told is the evil we do in bringing peace and plenty to foreign shores, where then is the trust? If we cannot remember who we are, if we cannot comprehend what it means to be this shining light on the hill. I've got a fan I know blowing on me, but it's also drying my voice out. If we cannot remember who we are, if we cannot comprehend what it means to be this shining light on the hill, this country of wonder and riches, this America, heavenly kingdom, then we shall surely slip into the long dark night that the enemies of our freedoms so richly desire. We are told always that there is no black and white, that there are only shades of gray. This is a picture that is held up to us, but it is only a picture, and it is false. Each day, each of us makes countless choices, and each of these choices is black or white. If we choose over and over again, as we have for so long, to choose the black choices because they are easier, to choose me over us, to choose division and strife over assimilation and trust, then we slowly slip into that black night. I do not so choose. I am your centurion. This heavenly kingdom shall not fall. I put in heavenly kingdom because that's what America means, heavenly kingdom. And as far as I'm concerned, where I am, this region, this heavenly kingdom shall not fall. America is going down. That outer part of the shell of the onion is going to be torched. So, I do not so choose. I am your centurion. This America shall not fall. I do not want to see that happen here, and I don't believe it will happen here. Yahweh has a plan. So, all right. So, all that to say, suckage, pure suckage in a time of suckage. But hey, it was a good excuse for me to just do a little review, recap, or not review, but an introduction to that book. So read it if you want. So below 100, don't bother calling yourself a prepper. Below 200, pure suckage in a time of suckage. Below 300, abysmal. Below 500, still failing. Below 700 ballpark, barely adequate. Above 800, pretty darn good. Above 900, awesomeness. And most likely nearly impossible. Okay. So, and I haven't taken the test. So probably score about the same as everybody else, but I'm trying. You know, like I said, when Obama was being reelected, I was like, look, we have what we have. We've done what we can. We've got what we've got. We got the people around us that we got around us, and you know, if the end happens tomorrow, we'll pick up the pieces and see what happens. You know, and just keep putting one step in front of the other. You got to have people around you you can trust. People, you've got to have people around you you can trust. You have got to have trust. And let me say this final word: trust. You know, trust in people, not necessarily. I mean, you got to have, at some point, you got to have people around you you can trust. Yes, implicitly. Where does that start with? Having faith. You know, having trust in the Father. Having trust in God. So, and that's one thing. The only thing probably that has kept me going is just my irascible, my hardcore. It's a dirty word, but you know, Calvinism. I believe in the sovereignty of God. Somebody does something bad to me, God allowed it to happen. Something good's going to come of it. You know, you meant it for evil. God meant it for good. You know, you want to try to kill me? If God wills it, it'll happen. If He doesn't, it's not going to happen. I don't care what else happens. He is the one in control. Okay? So, that is really the only reason I'm still alive, because I would have given up a long time ago. And I think that's what's killing a lot of guys. So, if they don't have that trust, that theology. So, that one dear friend of mine, he did not have a good theological foundation, and you know, makes it hard to deal with the evil that people do to you and the bad things that happen in your life. So, well, tired. Good night. This is Jerry Diamond. If you're listening to this, you are the remnant.